From Vladivostok, Russia, President Vladimir Putin has once again made clear Moscow's red lines in the ongoing war in Ukraine. Standing before cameras on September 5, 2025, he issued a warning that could escalate already tense relations between Russia and the West. His remarks came just a day after Kyiv's Western partners floated the possibility of committing troops to Ukraine in the framework of a future peace arrangement. Putin wasted no time in addressing the development, framing it as a direct provocation and a justification for Russia's continued military posture. He did so in his usual tone, measured but unmistakably firm, while reminding the world of the consequences of such a move. Vladimir Putin said, as for possible military contingent in Ukraine, this is one of the root causes of Ukraine's involvement in NATO. Therefore, if some troops appear there, especially now during the fighting, we proceed from the premise that they will be legitimate targets. The Russian leader's words underscored the Kremlin's long-standing narrative that NATO's presence in Ukraine represents not only interference, but also an existential threat to Russia's security. By repeating this line in Vladivostok, Putin reinforced his stance that Moscow is prepared to act militarily against any Western deployment, regardless of the framing or intention. The timing of the warning was deliberate. It followed statements from Western capitals indicating that allies were considering sending contingents into Ukraine, not necessarily for combat, but as part of a long-term stabilization and security guarantee once a peace settlement is reached. For Russia, however, the nuance hardly matters. The presence of foreign troops, Putin argued, would place them in the same category as combatants already engaged in the war. In Moscow's view, such a move risks transforming the Ukraine conflict into a direct confrontation between Russia and NATO. Western officials have often tried to downplay that scenario, suggesting deployments would be limited, defensive, or contingent on a ceasefire. Yet Putin's rhetoric leaves little doubt that the Kremlin will see any boots on the ground as hostile. By labeling Western troops legitimate targets, Putin signaled more than just a military stance. He sought to deter allies from crossing what Russia considers a red line. The word choice was intentional, grounded in the language of international law and the logic of battlefield realities. In his eyes, any soldier fighting in or stationed within Ukraine, regardless of flag, becomes part of the war effort. As for possible military contingent in Ukraine, this is one of the root causes of Ukraine's involvement in NATO. Therefore, if some troops appear there, especially now during the fighting, we proceed from the premise that they will be legitimate targets. The statement also echoed a broader theme in Russia's messaging that Western involvement has been the driving force behind Ukraine's alignment with NATO. By emphasizing that the possibility of foreign troops was a root cause, Putin tried to shift blame away from Moscow's invasion and onto Washington, Brussels, and their partners. Observers in Vladivostok noted how carefully Putin delivered his remarks, avoiding theatrics, but speaking with a gravity designed to resonate far beyond Russia's borders. His comments were not just for domestic audiences, but for policymakers in Berlin, Paris, London, and especially Washington. Diplomats quickly interpreted the warning as part of a wider Kremlin strategy, one that mixes military threats with diplomatic messaging. The goal, to raise the stakes for Western decision-makers, forcing them to weigh the risks of escalation before making commitments about Ukraine's security. At the same time, Putin's choice to deliver these remarks in Vladivostok carried its own symbolism. The city, situated in Russia's far east, hosts the Eastern Economic Forum, a platform where Moscow seeks to project strength, cultivate Asian partnerships, and present itself as a global power resistant to Western isolation. By speaking there, Putin linked Russia's economic outreach in Asia with its military defiance in Europe. The broader context cannot be ignored. Just days earlier, European leaders in Paris had debated their own role in Ukraine's future security, with some countries signaling readiness to send non-combat forces if a ceasefire or peace deal were struck. France, Germany, and Poland had all faced domestic debates about whether Europe can afford to leave security guarantees solely to the United States. For Putin, those signals were enough to justify another warning. In his telling, the very notion of Western troops in Ukraine validates Russia's original fears of NATO encroachment. The message was clear: Moscow will not distinguish between combat and peacekeeping forces if they set foot on Ukrainian soil. Military analysts point out that this stance leaves little room for ambiguity. If NATO or European troops were to deploy, Russia might target them directly, raising the spectre of open conflict between nuclear-armed powers. This, in turn, could force Western leaders to rethink not just strategy, but the entire framework of their support for Ukraine. Still, the Kremlin's posture is not entirely new. Since the earliest days of the war, Russian officials have insisted that Western involvement turns Ukraine into a proxy battlefield. What makes Putin's latest statement significant is its timing, delivered at a moment when allies are openly discussing long-term commitments that could extend far beyond military aid and weapons deliveries. For Kyiv, the words are both a warning and a reminder of the stakes. Ukrainian leaders continue to press for stronger Western guarantees, arguing that without them, Russia will simply regroup and attack again. Yet Putin's blunt threat underscores the risks inherent in such guarantees, raising fears that they could draw NATO directly into the conflict. The international reaction will likely unfold in the coming days as European capitals weigh both their commitments to Ukraine and their tolerance for confrontation with Moscow. But for now, Putin's words hang heavy over the debate. Any Western troops in Ukraine, he insists, will not be seen as peacekeepers. They will be treated as enemies. By framing the issue so starkly, Putin has once again reminded the world that the Ukraine conflict is not just about territory or politics, but about the fragile line separating war between nations from war between alliances.